In America, the first newspaper, Public Occurrences, which was published in 1690, was published without authority and was immediately oppressed. Immediately before the American Revolution, we had 43 articles in print. During the era of the printing press, newspapers thrived. They were cheap and they were democratic. Previously, newspapers could be sold to the elite, but because the literacy rates had risen, newspapers could be sold cheaply, and more classes had access to them. In the early papers, illustrations and engravings supplemented what photos would do in the 20th century.
The University of Missouri's Fine Art Department, students there still practice one of the oldest ways of reproducing an image. We call this the intaglio method, where drawing is etched into a copper plate. It can be reproduced on paper thousands and thousands of times over. To change a blank copper plate into an image, the first step is to apply a hard ground, which is an oily, waxy substance, to the plate and allow it to dry. The next step is to treat the hard ground with heat, which chemically changes the substance so we can start drawing sooner. In this case, we'll be illustrating for a press release from the City of Columbia concerning a smoke test of sewers, which will occur on November 22nd. If I was an artist before the 1800s, I would draw from my imagination. However, in modern times, I can base my drawing on a photograph. While creating the image, it'll appear backwards when we print it on paper, so when I add text, I write backwards. As you can see, where the drawing has occurred, we can see the bare copper underneath the hard ground. When we put this in an acid bath for 30 minutes, the acid will eat away wherever there's not hard ground, which means where our drawing exists. You can see where I sketched and where the acid has been burnt. To ink the plate, I've prepared a piece of tarlatan cloth and some purple printer's ink, to which I've added a little bit of oil. And it's a nice consistency. I'm just going to take some ink and just put it inside the lines of my plate. Alright. Now we're going to wipe the plate off. With paper from a phone book, because it's smooth, and we just want to remove them from the surface and not from inside my etched lines. This plate has been inked and wiped. Now we're going to put paper which has been soaking for an hour over the plate, cover with the blankets, which along with this wheel provide pressure. And now we get to see how it turned out. Not bad. Here's our illustration of city workers performing a smoke test on sewers, which will occur on November 22nd in the City of Columbia.
Then, in January of 1897, the first half-tone portrait of the late Thomas C. Platt appeared in the front of the New York Times. On December 12, 1912, the New York Sun printed with photogravure, which introduced into this country the latest idea in newspaper illustrating. For England, the first photo image appeared in 1842 in Illustrated London News. It showed an attempted assassination on Queen Victoria. The picture was, of course, an artist's interpretation because cameras were far too archaic to capture action at this point. Now, here photographers and newspapers began appearing in the early 20th century. In fact, certain publications were devoted to illustration and photos alone. Germans in the 1920s pioneered mass distribution of photos through newspapers, so when political tensions forced them to immigrate into the United States, they brought their ideas with them. In 1936, Henry Luce's publication Empire sold the first issue of Life magazine. Printing photographs before computers was a considerably more tedious process because printers had to transcribe layers of photographs onto print paper. Photo offset printing involves using light-sensitive chemicals and photographic techniques to transfer images and type from original materials to printing plates. Offset printing is still used, but it's considerably faster now because the images are digital. The golden era of photojournalism lasted between the 30s and the 50s before the invention of widespread use of television gave people more options for viewing images.
Web offset printing, and the reason is that it makes an impression on a rubber blanket on the press, and then the rubber blanket makes the impression on the paper, so it's offset.
When I came here in 1981, we had, I'm going to say, 6 photographers. They processed their own film, they printed their photos, and then wrote cut lines to go with the photos. It was a time where the process was a lot more complicated, which in my mind back then was more of an art, I think, to printing, and now printing for reproduction, and it's moved steadily toward more science. There's a big difference, and the difference is when they were shooting film and making prints, they shot a lot fewer photos and were a lot more, I think, planned their shots in a lot more detail. Because obviously with a digital camera, you don't run out of film. Now they come in, and we have 4 photographers. They come back and download their images from a card. They can just look at them on a screen, of course, and so editing is a lot quicker, and then they hand it off to a technician who prepares it for publication. So you cut out all those steps. We just download the graphic into InDesign is the program we use, and it's instant. It goes from the newsroom. We put all the type and photos on the page. They pick it up down at pre-press. They press a button and it comes out on a plate, a printing plate. And it has had a really good effect on our ability to push deadlines out, which is important for us, especially because we're an afternoon paper. Plus, with the technology and Photoshop and other technology, the reproduction has just gotten amazing. Sure. We were the first newspaper in the state to go all digital. St. Louis and Kansas City were kind of phasing it in, but they have 30 or 40 photographers and we have 5. So those first digital cameras cost about $25,000 each. A big investment. And so we bought them. We bought 5 of them. And in exchange, I was spending about $30,000 a year on film and chemistry and things to make prints. So we immediately wiped that out, $30,000 a year. We just started doing color here at the Tribune probably about 1997. The way you do a color project is you make separations with film separations, CMYK. So you made 4 different parts of the negative, then tape them together. I mean, literally, you tape them together and try to make sure that it's all lined up, and then, that makes your color print. Another limitation on doing color throughout the paper is your press, because you've got to have enough press units with color fountains to go throughout the paper.
In order for a photo reproduction in a newspaper to look similar to the original photo, you must translate an RGB file to a CMYK file. Cameras use light, and light can be seen through the red, blue, green spectrum, but often these colors are too bright to be reproduced in print. The inks can't make those colors, whereas light can make more colors. Think of a newspaper as a painting. Paint, which uses primary colors, uses a different gamut than light. So the cyan, magenta, yellow, black is the equivalent of red, blue, yellow paint. The images you see on screen are going to be different than the images that are printed because they use dissimilar color spectrums. Here we have an RGB photo. It's straight from the camera. This is what the camera saw in terms of color. Now, if we change this to CMYK color, you'll notice that the colors get duller. Some of them are not there. This is what that RGB photo would look like if printed without color correction. Now you notice here we have RGB, CMYK, RGB, CMYK. Notice the blues and the reds and the yellow and the fire hydrant there change colors. This is why it's important to use software to color correct for our printing. Our eyes see the most visible light. The camera produces in the RGB color space. Print inks produce a similar spectrum than either. This is why print reproduction inks can't produce the same colors as our cameras can. Colors that can't be reproduced in print are considered outside the gamut. For instance, here's a conversion from RGB, which is the color that would appear online, to CMYK, which is the color that would appear in print. Here we have an image as you would see on the screen. Now in print, this would look different. It would be a halftone composed of tiny dots. Here's what you would see if you saw that image in print in a newspaper and got in really close. Lots of tiny dots. Now if you watch, as we zoom out, you see the image start to form. And the farther we zoom out, the more of the image we get, until we see something almost identical to the original as you would see on screen. At the Columbia Daily Tribune and other newspapers around the world, the halftone process is used to reproduce digital photographs onto newsprint. Halftone describes how a photograph is broken into tiny dots which represents the color elements of the image. Thus, the image on print is an optical illusion. The image appearing solid is actually a composite of many fine dots. Many newsrooms employ photo technicians who are responsible for the conversion of digital images via the CMYK halftone process. At modern newspapers, this conversion is done with automated software. So overall, preparing a photograph for online screen viewing is vastly different than preparing it for print.
E-ink is a type of electronic paper currently available in grayscale for mobile devices such as e-readers. Among them are Barnes & Noble's Nook and Amazon's Kindle. John Fox shows how images appear on his Nook. Well, a recent issue of Esquire published in e-ink, so I assume that the future of magazine will have something to do with e-ink, especially when it is able to do color.
We all know that the future is retro, and I look forward to receiving my newspaper in a pneumatic tube.
Though e-ink and tubes may come in the near future, I believe the key to photographic reproduction lies in holograms.